Sometimes when it rains, it pours, and it's coming down in buckets in College Station, Texas, as Texas A&M has seen an egregious amount of players enter the transfer portal. And some you'll be able to replace pretty quickly. Some you'll be able to find at least serviceable replacements via the transfer portal or through the recruiting ranks. But there's not many players built like Walter Nolen. So where does the former number one defensive prospect land in 2024? Let's talk about it. If you are new here, welcome on into the channel. My name is Cole Thompson. I'm a radio show host based in Houston, and I talk college football daily. So if this is the type of content you enjoy, plus coaching searches, the bowl status, really everything that goes on in the world of college football, make sure you smash that subscribe button down below. Leave a comment telling me where you would like to see Walter Nolen strap it up in 2024. Tell your friends, your family, your sister, your brother, your mortal enemies, your best of bros, your workout buddy, your entire church congregation, and the drunk guy passed out in a Publix parking lot about this channel. Give me a follow on social media at Mr. Cole Thompson. It's the exact same as my YouTube handle. So when you click follow on one, hit subscribe on the other. That way, we can always continue to talk about college football. Walter Nolen's in the transfer portal. This is official now. There was rumors going on that he was at least intending to enter the transfer portal, and then he met with Mike Elko, the brand new coach at A&M. He talked about the plan moving forward, and now he is in the portal. This is a very big deal for a multitude of reasons. Let's start off with the first thing. Walter Nolen is not one of these players where you have to go ahead and sit down and wonder about scheme fit and wonder about where he fits inside of a defense and the role he'll play moving forward. Walter Nolen is an anomaly. There is one of one in this recruiting cycle and in this transfer portal cycle. He is the only player that is built like Walter Nolen. 6'4", 315 pounds, can gain a little bit of weight, can shed a little bit of weight. He can play a 0 tech, he can play a 3 tech, he can play a 5 tech. He is a plug and play defensive nightmare, and any coach that gets his hands on him is getting a premier talent that is only going to bolster your run defense. It's only going to add more of an element in the middle of the field when it comes to pressures. It's only going to add a second wind when it comes to sack totals. This is a kid who is emulating Bear Alexander from last year. Everyone remembers Bear Alexander. Guy goes to Georgia. He doesn't really get on the field that much. He's kind of been lost in translation. And as soon as he hit the transfer portal, the first question wasn't, hey, who wants Bear Alexander? The first question was, who won't be going after Bear Alexander? Because of everybody wanted Bear Alexander. And that's the same thing with Walter Nolen. And therein is your key element when it comes to watching this search. Walter Nolen can be as patient as he wants. He understands the NIL game. He understands how much he can make in college. He understands that in any defensive formation, he is only going to prosper and likely turn into a quality player that we're talking about eventually finding their way into first-round conversations. So he does not need to go and just make the first phone call. He does not need to go back to Knoxville and talk to Josh Heupel and then immediately sign on the dotted line. He can go to 16 different visits if he wants to. He can hear out every single plan, and he has earned it. There is one of him. And this is a big thing when it comes to another guy like Evan Stewart, who potentially is entering the transfer portal for Texas A&M. This is a guy who is a premier plug-and-play outside boundary receiver, where if you get him in an offense that has a qualified quarterback, best of luck to that defensive back. He's getting burned for 6. He can hold out. He can listen to reviews. He can go ahead and have conversations with everybody, including Texas A&M if the NIL collective is able to start picking up, gain momentum, and give him the opportunity to stick around. But there's one of one Walter Nolen in this class. So whoever does land him is not just getting a premier player. They're getting a game changer and a wrecking style defensive lineman that will terrorize running backs and torch quarterbacks. Who are the top players to go ahead and get the guy? For starters, I think we can all agree it's Tennessee. Tennessee is definitely going to be in the running. He's from Powell, Tennessee. He was one of the 5 finalists Tennessee was one of the 5 finalists when he was going through the recruiting process. He actually almost committed to Tennessee before he went to Texas A&M. They are bolstering their NIL collective because they understand. They get the game. We want to beat Nick Saban. We want to beat LSU. We want to beat Kirby Smart. Got to get better when it comes to the NIL. It's a homegrown feel. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You know that whenever you get close to home, sometimes it's best to go back to where your roots reside. They need help on the defensive line. They need help to be able to bolster up their rushing attack defensively. And I think it would make a ton of sense for him to maybe play in this system, especially with Josh Heupel, because of there will be eyes fixated on Tennessee. They're a team on the come up. They're a team that a lot of people are bending to believe that next season is really their year. They won't have to rely heavily on Joe Milton, and they're going to be aggressive in the transfer portal, adding in defensive talent and offensive line talent. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him make the trip back home, especially if NIL is a major effective. Speaking of major effective with NIL, you got to talk about Miami. The one thing that we can say about the Hurricanes is there is always going to be an attentiveness so long as Mario Cristobal is running the show in trench play. And it's been that way everywhere he has gone, whether it was at Oregon, whether it was at Florida International, when he was the Alabama offensive line coach. He has always been fortifying, adding in the right players in the trenches. And Miami wants to be a player in the ACC. They can be a player in the ACC. For most of you who have actually listened to all of these other videos, you've heard me say, I believe Miami is next year's Texas, where they will go out, they will add in a few key players here and there to Coral Gables. The NIL initiative will be booming, and because of it, they will find their way into an ACC title game. They're on the come up. They feel like they're on the rise. And you know that a guy like Mario Cristobal is going to do everything in his power to make sure that his trench play is elite. He already went out last season. He was very aggressive in adding in transfer portal players for the offensive line. There's rumors and speculation. They're looking for a veteran quarterback. They're looking for defensive line help. They can go ahead and get Walter Nolen down to South Beach into Coral Gables. This is a game changer for their status in terms of the ACC contenders. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to be a playoff team. Doesn't mean they'll win a national title, but it does mean that you have to be paying attention to what's going on in year 3 of the Cristobal era. Kind of like we had to be paying attention to what was going on this past season in Austin with Steve Sarkisian. Speaking of Steve Sarkisian, Texas, they're absolutely going to be a player, and they should be a player because this is the first year of the SEC, and you're no longer expecting recession but progression in the 40 acres. And there's a reason for that, because expectations have drastically changed. Once you start to win, you start to build this persona that this is the new norm. Everybody in Austin now doesn't care that Texas is going to the SEC because Texas beat up on an Alabama team that is now playing in the college football playoff, and they won by 10 points with a Big 12 roster. So in my eyes and in most fans' eyes, they are saying to themselves, that means that we're good enough to play in the SEC. So expectations are not changing down in Austin in the slightest. But personnel is. You are going to lose Byron Murphy. You are going to lose T'Vondre Sweat. You don't have that type of emulating factor to your trenches like you do with Sweat, who won Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, or Murphy, who won Big 12 Defensive Lineman of the Year. But you do have Walter Nolen. And Nolan, he loves to stay at Texas. He's already basked into what the Lone Star State is. It's a quick trip over from College Station to Austin. And how emphatically amazing would that be when Texas enters Kyle Field for the first time since 2011, and there are boos coming down from Kyle Field from the 12th man faithful, and instead, they're not just booing Steve Sarkisian, they're not just hindering the Longhorns, they're letting number 0 know, you should have stuck around in College Station. Go ahead and get ready for the horns. And he can say back, no, you get ready for my horns. I'm coming to kill your quarterback. I think that it's a big deal. They have the NIL money. They definitely are going to be aggressive when it comes to replacing current talent. You're not expecting to stay idle when you jump to the SEC. You are expected to make significant progress. Speaking of teams that like to use the transfer portal a lot, Florida State. Very hard to say that they're not going to be a player in all of this. You know, you look at death, taxes, and Mike Norvell utilizing the transfer portal to his favor. They've gone out and they've added in a ton of talent over the last few years. In fact, you can make a case that there's nobody better when it comes to bringing in the right talent and bolstering that right talent than Mike Norvell and his staff down in Tallahassee. Look at a guy like Jared Verse. This was a player that was at Albany who teams started to scout when they were seeing him on the radar for the Great Danes. And then when he entered the transfer portal, like every ACC school was on the phone within 5 seconds saying, hey, please come play for us. And he goes to Tallahassee, and now he's going to be a first-round pick. And he would have been a first-round pick last year. And he was the anchor of this defense, a very formidable defense that held Louisville to 6 points and under 275 total yards of offense, and did this on the regular occurrence. But that's not the only case. They've also gone out and they've added in other defensive linemen. They went and added Fentrell Cypress from Virginia. They went and they brought in Keon Coleman. There are a few things that I know in this world, and one of them is that you can bet your bottom dollar that Mike Norvell is never going to be satisfied with his recruiting class. He wants to add in proven commodities via the transfer portal. And as long as the NIL initiative is there, as long as people in Tallahassee realize what just happened and they don't want to be left out of the CFP again, they don't want to be left out of a first round bye again next season when it goes to 12 teams, they will be hyper attentive. It's going to be very challenging for, I think, another team to be able to match when you go and talk about production and when you look at results of what what Tallahassee and what Florida State provide for a guy like Walter Nolen. He can go walk into that building and he can say, this guy got really good. 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 All for transferring here, and they were defensive linemen. I can do the exact same thing. Let's get two more out of the way real fast. Number one, Georgia. Plain and simple. Georgia is literally like the factory for defensive linemen right now. You look at the names that have come out in recent years. Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter probably being the two most dominating names. They've always been good defensively. Like you go back and you look at the history of just Georgia football, defensive line, linebackers, cornerbacks, they have been a pipeline, just like Alabama when it comes to getting the right players on the defensive front seven. And the big thing is that it doesn't seem like Glenn Schumann's going anywhere. So that's a good balance for learning how to play the game at an elite level, even though he's a linebackers coach. He knows how to game plan and prep. They're not seeming like they're going to be losing that much talent either. And with the offense of what's coming back right now, this is actually kind of a big deal because if you look at this defensive line this past year, it was not the version of Georgia that we knew for 3 seasons. It was not the version that won back-to-back national titles. The offense carried the weight. But imagine if you get Carson Beck, several of these wide receivers, maybe a transfer running back in the portal, and then you add in Walter Nolen to your defensive line. Game changer. Like, I'm talking about there is no shot that you're losing to Alabama, game changer. Like, you will run the table against everybody in college football, and anybody doubting you and your status as being one of the prime schools, yeah, that's out of the water in what, 10 seconds? One play? Yeah, best of luck to you. Last one, USC. I don't think USC is going to actually go after a guy like Walter Nolen, not because of they don't have the money, but because of I feel like right now their attentiveness has to be at other positions defensively. They need cornerback help. They need safety help. They need linebacker help. They added in 2 very good defensive linemen last year, and Bear Alexander and Anthony Lucas. Surprisingly, a former teammate of actually Walter Nolen at Texas A&M. But the difference here is that they do have the money. And going to Los Angeles might be a culture shock for Nolan, but at the same time, this would be exactly what is needed to fortify your roster when you make the jump to the Big Ten. People seem to forget, next season, you're not playing Stanford. You're not playing Cal. You don't get to go up against an Oregon State or even a Utah for that matter. Arizona's fine, but you know what? Now you got to go up against Iowa. Now you got to go up against Michigan. Now you got Ohio State, you got Penn State, you got Michigan State, you got great programs that know how to bolster their offensive line because they're bred in the Midwest. You have to finalize your defensive front to add pressure into the backfield. And if you can't do that, best of luck to you. Can't wait to see what 5-7 looks like underneath Lincoln Riley. Fans are pissed at 7-5 in the Pac-12. You think 5-7 is going to be serviceable in the Big Ten? So they could go after him. I think they will be aggressive when it comes to adding in defensive players in the portal. But I think right now they're on the outside looking in when it comes to the Walter Nolen sweepstakes. But never say never. Again, Nolan is one of one. He is an anomaly. Call him basically the Incredible Hulk because you can't find another version of him on this planet. That's what you got. And there's going to be teams that are interested. Countless more that I didn't name, but just a few to monitor off the top of my head. Tennessee is going to be in the running. Miami's going to be in the running. Texas should be in the running. Florida State absolutely should be a player. Georgia, I think, is going to hang around a little bit. And USC pulling up the rear in the Big Ten. All those teams and countless more are looking to get the number 1 player in the transfer portal. And yes, there's not a close second compared to Walter Nolen. Thank you so much for watching that video. Don't hit the X button yet. Make sure you hit subscribe to keep up with all of our daily content found on Just Saying It and anything else that we post on this channel. Bye.